All right, today, y'all, we're going to take a look at solving absolute value equations and inequalities. One of the big things to remember about absolute value is, number one, what it looks like. It is two vertical bars on either side of a number or an expression with variables. I know that some of you probably remember seeing this back in middle school, maybe even in foundations in algebra. But it would be something that looks like this, like the absolute value of -4. Absolute value means the distance from 0. So when I say the absolute value of -4, basically what I'm asking you is how far from 0 is -4. So it's 4 spaces from 0. You think about a number line, the 4 spaces from 0, because -4 would be here. So it's asking you what that distance is. So think about that. You know, if you've seen people mark distance with two little bars like this, that's what the two little bars of an absolute value are asking you. The distance from 0. So what we're going to be looking at today is what happens when we have an equation, an expression inside an absolute value, and we're trying to figure out what it is, what the value of the variable is inside it. So starting off with something simple, something like this. The absolute value of x is 7. So what this is saying is it's saying the distance that x is from 0. Remember, that's what an absolute value means. So the distance that x is from 0 is 7 spaces. Okay? So, thinking about a number line, what is 7 spaces from 0? And I know my drawing is not real pretty here, but 7 is 7 spaces from 0. But -7 is also 7 spaces from 0. So from here to here is 7 spaces. From here to here is 7 spaces. So which one is it? What could x be? Do you just have to pick one and guess? Actually, what it means is when you're dealing with an absolute value equation is that this x on the inside could be either 1. So it's sort of like those OR inequalities we talk about, where we had options for x. It's kind of the same thing here. X could be -7, or x could be +7. And so actually, both of these things are my answer. So the whole thing with an absolute value is that you have two possibilities. Now with absolute value inequalities, those possibilities get a little different looking. You'll still see the OR inequalities, but there's also some that are the AND inequalities, but we'll look at those when we get there. So with an equation, what you see is that if you're talking about the distance from 0 being 7 spaces, it could be -7 or it could be +7. And so you have two solutions. So that's what an absolute value requires you to do, even when it gets uglier. So even when it gets to be something that looks like this guy right here, the absolute value of 2x minus 5 equals 9. That means the distance that this stuff right here, and I'm going to be real mathematical here, in real math terms, this stuff is 9 spaces from 0. So if that is 9 spaces from 0, that means 2x minus 5 either has to be -9 or 2x minus 5 has to be +9. Now some of you are about to get in a little conniption fit and say, wait a minute, Mr. Harrison, you forgot right here to change that -5 to a positive. When the absolute value is always positive. Yes, the distance from 0 is 9 spaces. The answer is +9. But when we say this stuff on the inside, we're saying all of that stuff has to be -9, or all of that stuff has to be +9 to get that answer +9. So what you do is you just try to figure out what would x be to make it be -9. Now, once you get to here, though, you're just solving an equation like normal. So what I would do is pause the video right here and solve this equation right here like you normally would. So hopefully after you've paused the video, now you can come back and see the answer. And I'm going to write it like you guys to save a little bit of time today. But if I add 5 to both sides, that gives me 2x equals -4. Then I divide by 2 on both sides. X is equal to -2. There's one of my answers. On the other one, I do the same thing, but notice what happens. I add 5. I get 14. Divide by 2. I get 7. So notice on this one that your answers are not the same number. What it means is that if I take this -2 right here and I plug it in for x right here, it will give me -9, and the absolute value would be 9. So -2 times 2 is -4. -4 minus 5 is -9, but the absolute value would be 9. It's 9 spaces from 0 because this -2 makes this equation equal -9. Same thing on the 7. If I plug in the 7 up here, 7 times 2 is 14. 14 minus 5 is 9. The absolute value of 9 is 9. So what these numbers that I get down here, what they're giving me is it's giving me the answer that actually is 9 spaces from 0. Now, up at the top up here in the words, I've also given you a way to think about this, is that anytime you have an equation, no matter what the expression is inside here, you set it equal to the positive version of the answer, you set it equal to the negative version of the answer. But my suggestion is if you just think about the spaces from 0, 9 spaces from 0, it'll help you set it up pretty easy every single time. So let's do another one. I want you to try to see if you can set it up first. So pause the video and set this one up. After you've paused the video, hopefully you tried to set this up. But remember what this is saying is this right here is 15 spaces from 0, right? So what is 15 spaces from 0? Well, that means the 6x minus 3 has to be equal to -15, or the 6x minus 3 has to be equal to +15. It has to be one or the other because it's 15 spaces from 0. Now pause the video here and solve each one of these equations. After you've paused the video and solved it, hopefully you got the right answer. You add 3. You get -12. Divide by 6. You get -2 for this one. On this one, you add 3. You get 18. Divide by 6. You get x is 3. So -2 or 3 would work right here and make this 15 spaces from 0. Again, the whole point is that if you plug in -2 right here into this x, it'll give me -15, which is 15 spaces from 0. If you plug in this 3 to the x, it'll give me 15, which is 15 spaces from 0. So that is the goal when we're solving an absolute value. Now, we're not going to do this entire problem right here, but I just want to show you, and I'll show you what the setup looks like, and you can try it on your own, and I'll tell you what the answers are. But right here, if you ever have something outside the absolute value, like this -5 and this times 3, that's what that 3 in front means, don't distribute it and don't subtract the 5 from the 1. Really what you need to do is think of it as getting rid of those first, just like you would if it was like this stuff in this absolute value is one big variable x, like it's 3x minus 5. If that was one big variable, you would add the 5 over first, then you would divide by 3 to get the absolute value by itself. And the reason we do that is because the absolute value is a little weird. It's a little different. It's not like a normal distributive property, so you can't just start distributing. Then what you would do is, just like we did on the previous 2 problems, is you would set this up equal to -5, because it's 5 spaces from 0, or set this up equal to +5, because it's 5 spaces from 0. Solve each one of these and you would get an answer. What you would actually get on this one, if you want to try it on your own and see if you get it right, would be -1. What you would get on this one over here would actually be a fraction. It'd be 3/2 or 6/4. Once you get it in your calculator, you can reduce it to 3/2. 1.5 is a decimal. So you can try that one on your own. Alright, so that's basically absolute value equations. You do run into every once in a while one that is really ugly like this. And the reason this one is really ugly is because it's not just 4 over here. If it was just 4 over here, I would do exactly like we've been doing. I would take it and say 2x plus 5 equals -4. Or 2x plus 5 equals +4. And I'm putting a space there for a reason. So normally we would take it and we'd say, okay, just -4, +4, and then solve it, right? Because it's 4 spaces from 0. Well, the tricky part on this one is that there's already a variable right here on this side too. So it's not just equal to 4. So what you would have to do is you'd have to remember to also take the opposite of the 3x and keep the same as the 3x. Just like you would do the opposite of 4 and the +4. So the -4 and the +4. So basically you're taking the negative version of this whole thing, 3x plus 4, and the positive version. So sometimes you'll see those. I probably won't throw one of those at you on the test, but I just do want you to be aware of those. The issue with this particular type is when you solve this, if you add the 3x over here, you get 5x. Subtract the 5 over here, you get -9. Divide by 5, you're going to get -9/5. Kind of an ugly answer there, and that can happen when you have variables on both sides like this. On this one, I would move the smaller one again, like I told you before. Subtract 2x. That gives me x plus 4. Subtract 4, and that gives me 1. So x is 1. So here's the issue. When you have these ugly ones with absolute values, because absolute values are so weird, I'm talking about distance, and it's not just a normal number. When you plug in this 1 right here, when you plug it into the equation up here, it gives you 7. And it gives you 7. The absolute value of 7 is 7. So it's true. But when you plug in -9/5 up here and up here, it gives you two things that are not actually equal. And so they actually call this, it's a funky little word here, it's called an extraneous solution. It's up there at the top of the page. It just means that it doesn't actually work in the original problem. Even though I solved this correctly, this one doesn't actually work in the original answer, in the original problem. So this is the only one that works. So just be aware that those exist with absolute values. Again, I'm probably not going to try to trick you too much with those, just because I just want you guys to know some basic absolute value equations. So then we have absolute value inequalities. You have absolute value inequalities that have a less than sign and a greater than sign. Now that can also be a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to. It doesn't change what you do when you have the little equal to bar. What you want to focus in on is the less than or equal to or the greater than or equal to. Now, you can pause this video if you want to have these little notes down. That's completely fine. But I want to just show you what it actually looks like and talk about the distance, so that way you can understand it and understand why it is what it is. You'll notice that on the less than, it ends up being an inequality like one of the and inequalities. And I had a teacher who always said with absolute values, if it's less than, she made it a goofy thing and said less than and. She would always say that because that's the kind of inequality it is. Notice with the greater than, it ends up being two inequalities like we just looked at with equations with an or. So my teacher in like middle school and high school, actually the same teacher, another teacher did it in high school, said greater than. But this only works when you're dealing with absolute values, so it's just kind of a goofy way, and I still remember it. So whenever you have a less than for absolute value, it's an and inequality. Whenever you have a greater than, it's an or inequality. But let's talk about why. So if you have this absolute value, remember what this is saying is that this stuff right here is less than 11 spaces. Notice it's talking about that distance again. It's less than 11 spaces from 0, right? Well, if you think about the number line, and you got 0 here, you got 11 over here, you got negative 11 over here, where would less than 11 spaces from 0 be? Well, right here, all the way to 0, that's 11 spaces. From here all the way to 11, that's 11 spaces. So where would less than 11 spaces be? If you think about kind of the inequalities that we've talked about, it's this stuff in between, because all of these little distances in here, like if I pick this number right here, let's say the number 5.5, that's less than 11 spaces from 0. If I pick this little number here, let's say that's -2. That's less than 11 spaces from 0. So any of these answers between here would work. So notice what I just said. Any of the answers between 11 and -11 would work. So literally what you do with these is you put this inequality like we had before in the previous section on inequalities in between -11 and +11, and this will get you all those distances that are between -11 and +11, all those distances that are less than 11 spaces. Now, how do I solve this? I go back to my technique that I solved before. I subtract 7 on all three parts. That gives me -18. And 4, and then I divide by 2 on all three parts. That gives me 2 and -9. And guys, I mentioned this the other day in class. You need to make sure that you can not only write this stuff down on your paper, but you can also type it into a computer when you're dealing with inputting answers in online, if you're working on something online. And it's just the same way that you would write it, you just type it out. Yes, it may take you a little longer than writing it because you have to do a little bit more processing of where the buttons are on the computer. But it's the same way that you write it. So what this means, this answer down here, is that if I pick any number between -9 and 2, let's say like 0, and I plug in 0 up here into my original inequality, it works. So these numbers will give me numbers that are less than 11 spaces when I plug them in for x. That's the whole point of solving. All right, let's look at greater than. So greater than means, like I said just a minute ago, the distance is of this stuff right here, the distance is greater than. Now this does have the equal to, so I'm going to put or equal to right here underneath it. But remember, that's not going to change what I do. Greater than or equal to 8 spaces from 0. All right, so let's think about what that means. Okay, sorry, I put an S on 0. What is 8 spaces from 0? Well, 0's here, 8 is here, negative 8 is here. From here to here is 8 spaces. From here to here is 8 spaces. What would be greater than 8 spaces? Greater than 8 spaces would actually be over here, these numbers that are going this way. Or over here, these numbers that are going this way. So more than 8 spaces from 0 are those numbers. So what this means is that 3x minus 2, the stuff that's on the inside, has to be way down here. And this is the tricky part. This is the one that most people mess up on. Numbers that are less than or equal to negative 8. This one is the one that most people mess up on because they don't pay attention to the fact that the numbers down here are less than negative 8, even though the distance is greater than 8. So be careful with that one. That's the one that most people miss. On the other side of this stuff over here, I'm just going to draw an arrow down to here. 3x minus 2 could be these numbers. So it could be the numbers that are greater than 8. Most people don't miss this one because this one looks exactly like the inequality right here, just without the little absolute values. So if that's the only one you get right, you're definitely getting half of the problem right for sure. But the other one over here is also more than 8 spaces when you're less than negative 8. That's the tricky one. That's the one to pay attention to. And like I said, guys, you can look back at this, and that's what this says right here. That's the one that's the tricky one. That's the one you really got to watch out for. So greater than ends up being an or problem because it's less than negative 8 or greater than 8 this way. And then we just solve this just like we normally do. You can pause the video and try to solve it. So we add 2. You get negative 6, divide by 3, and you get negative 2. Do be careful if you're dividing by a negative, you flip the sign, but don't flip the sign right here. Add 2 here. You get 10. Divide by 3. And you get x is greater than or equal to 10/3. That's an ugly little decimal there, like 3.333 repeated forever. But what it's telling me is that if I plug any numbers that are less than negative 2, so negative 2 is down here, or any numbers bigger than 3.3, if I plug in any numbers this way or this way, it will give me answers that work up here that are more than 8 spaces from 0. So with less than, you set it up in between the two, negative 11 and positive 11. With greater than, you set up an or. Just be careful with this one. Make sure you change that symbol to less than negative 8. That's the one that'll screw you up right there because you're looking at this right here. Remember, distance is greater than 8, but the numbers down here are smaller than negative 8. So just be careful with that. So that is solving absolute value equations and inequalities. I will be around online on WebEx if you need some extra help. I'll post some things about that and post some announcements about that here in a little bit. Your homework will also be posted as well.